Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium. And as you can tell, the background behind me has changed a bit. I'm in the process of researching some new books. Dr. DeHart and I are almost done with the little project we've been working on. I'll have more about that once we get that closer to publication. But anyway, the reason for the lapse last week was I was simply exhausted, folks, moving books around behind me to get preparations made for the next set of projects coming down the pike, which there are about 8 actually. So anyway, today in the news and views, I want to talk about something that a lot of you, and I can't even tell you how many because I've lost count, on Facebook and in emails have been asking me what I think about the Syria situation. And in all honesty, my my first reaction when I heard about the chemical attacks was a gut reaction because I have not, to be honest with you, been following Syria that close. It appears to me to be simply so much more Western and particularly American meddling in the Middle East, and for some inexplicable reason supporting extremist Islamist regimes in toppling secular dictators that have been, in Mubarak's case, more or less friendly to the United States, in Gaddafi's case, at least no longer threatening to the United States as he was at one time. So this foreign policy aspect of the whole thing disturbs me. I'll be speaking to that a little bit later in today's news and views. But my gut reaction regarding the chemical attacks was that it was a false flag incident. In other words, it was not Bashar who committed the chemical attack. It was probably the opposition itself trying to pin it on Bashar precisely to get America involved. And the reason I thought that, and I still think that, at one uninformed level, is that Bashar had nothing to gain. Assad had nothing to gain from attacking his own people while UN inspectors were in Damascus and while Russia has been quietly and insistently all this time calling for UN resolutions and measures, not simply unilateral Western intervention. So Assad had, in my opinion, nothing to gain. And the problem with this also is, in my opinion, Assad's military doctrine, informed as Syrian military's doctrine would have been by Russian military doctrine. After all, the Soviet Union was a long supporter of Syria and a weapons provider to them. Gas was normally conceived by the Soviets as something that could be used as an artillery neutralization of enemy military potential, not against indiscriminate civilian populations. In other words, it was kind of like a World War I philosophy of the use of chemical weapons. Deplorable as those are, the doctrine itself would have meant that Assad would have been, if he used chemical weapons, loath to use them in that fashion. So I was rather puzzled by all this. 2 days ago, I had to make a trip to the bank. And as I usually do, I have the radio in my car set to the local talk radio station. And I drove in the morning, and that happened to be the time of day that Rush Limbaugh was on. So I got to listen to Rush, which is not usually something that I like to do. But on this particular occasion, he was actually very interesting because he took the view, very similar to what I'm taking, in that it was a false flag attack and that there was really no good moral or geopolitical reason for the United States to become involved. And I know the moral aspect sounds a bit difficult, but when you consider that if morality is used as an excuse for intervention, there will be no end of war. That's the problem. If your justification for war is to maintain the peace, then you're always going to be intervening. This has been the American pattern really since Lyndon Johnson and the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and that should tell you something right there. I believe that what we're looking at is the long-term foreign policy fallout of the assassination of President Kennedy. I maintain then, I maintain now that that was a coup d'etat, that it put into power a secret government that's been in power ever since, and you see that consistency in American foreign policy. Well, Limbaugh, getting into the idea of a false flag attack, cited an article by Joseph Bodansky, and I have that article here. I'll link it for you. And let me read something in that article before I get to a second very short article that I want to draw your attention to. In this article by Bodansky, he points out that there was intelligence preparation in the eastern provinces of Turkey prior to the chemical attack, and that American intelligence was involved. And the Free Syrian Army, the opposition, the so-called opposition, were told that they, quote, had to quickly prepare their forces for exploiting the U.S.-led bombing in order to march on Damascus and topple the Bashar al-Assad government, the senior commanders explained. The Qatari and Turkish intelligence officials assured the Syrian regional commanders that they would be provided with plenty of weapons for the coming offensive. Now let me skip forward in Bodansky's article just a bit. He said the descriptions of these meetings raised the question of the extent of foreknowledge of U.S. intelligence and, therefore, the Obama White House. All the sources consulted, both Syrian and Arab, stressed that the officials of the Mukharabat Amriki, that's the intelligence meetings in Turkey, actively participated in the meetings and briefings in Turkey. Therefore, at the very least, they should have known that the opposition leaders were anticipating a war-changing development. That is, a dramatic event which would provoke a U.S.-led military intervention. In other words, there's foreknowledge here, folks. To continue with Bodansky's article, the mere fact that weapons storage sites under the tight supervision of U.S. intelligence were opened up and that about 1,000 tons of high-quality weapons were distributed to the opposition indicates that U.S. intelligence anticipated such a provocation and the opportunity for the Syrian opposition to exploit the impact of the ensuing U.S. and Allied bombing. Hence, even if the Obama White House did not know in advance of the chemical provocation, they should have concluded, or at the very least suspected, that the chemical attack was most likely the war-changing development anticipated by the opposition leaders as provocation of U.S.-led bombing. Under such circumstances, the Obama White House should have refrained from rushing headlong to accuse Assad's Damascus and threaten retaliation, thus making the Obama White House at the very least complicit after the fact. Meanwhile, additional data from Damascus about the actual chemical attack increases the doubts about Washington's versions of events. And listen carefully, folks. Immediately after the attack, 3 hospitals of Doctors Without Borders in the greater Damascus area treated more than 3,600 Syrians affected by the chemical attack, and 355 of them died. Doctors Without Borders performed tests on the vast majority of those treated. Doctors Without Borders Director of Operations Bart Janssens summed up the findings. Quote, Doctors Without Borders can neither scientifically confirm the cause of these symptoms nor establish who is responsible for the attack. However, the reported symptoms of the patients in addition to the epidemiological pattern of the events characterized by the massive influx of patients in a short period of time, the origins of the patients, and the contamination of medical and first aid workers strongly indicate mass exposure to a neurotoxic agent, unquote. Simply put, even after testing some 3,600 patients, Doctors Without Borders failed to confirm that sarin was the cause of the injuries. According to Doctors Without Borders, the cause could have been nerve agents like sarin, concentrated riot control gas, or even high-concentration pesticides. Moreover, opposition reports that there was distinct stench during the attack suggest that it could have come from the kitchen sarin used by jihadist groups as distinct from the odorless military-type sarin or improvised agents like pesticides, unquote. Now, I'm going to skip to the very end of Bodansky's article because here is where he raises some very interesting questions. There remain the questions, quote, Given the extent of the involvement of the Makarabat Amriki opposition activities, how is it that U.S. intelligence did not know in advance about the opposition's planned use of chemical weapons in Damascus? If that's the case, it's a colossal failure, meaning American intelligence. And if they did know and warned the Obama White House, why then the sanctimonious rush to blame the Assad administration? Moreover, how can the Obama administration continue to support and seek to empower the opposition, which has just intentionally killed some 1,300 innocent civilians in order to provoke a U.S. military intervention? In other words, either way you look at this, there are serious foreign policy questions to be asked, and we'll get back to those. But now I want to draw your attention to another little article. The headline is from September 4th, 2013, but it was first posted Friday, September 28th, 2012. All right. And what we're citing here is a statement by Secretary Leon Panetta, and now CIA Director, who stated that on that day, September 28, 2012, the U.S. lost track of some of Syria's chemical weapons, which may have fallen into the hands of the Syrian opposition. So, in other words, the possibility does exist, and it's growing day by day as the evidence for Assad's involvement in this chemical attack begins to fray around the edges, that the Syrian opposition had access to these weapons and may have staged a false flag event and intended to do so precisely in order to place the blame on Bashar al-Assad. So, in other words, in this rush to bomb, we are not, in my opinion, having a full and adequate debate of all the facts. We are witnessing a phenomenon rather similar to the Benghazi episode. The countervailing story is being deliberately pushed away from the mainstream media in this rush for yet another intervention in the Middle East. Now, the odd question here to ask ourselves is, why does the foreign policy of the West in general, and America in particular, seem to be interventionist in favor of the very Islamicist regimes that we claim to be fighting in the war on terror? And I'm going to suggest that the answer is rather simple and beyond merely those investigations dealing with Syrian gas pipelines, Russian access to energy reserves. There's all sorts of stuff out there on the internet right now, including Saudi threats to Russia and so on, and Putin's outrage over these alleged threats. All of that, I'm suggesting, is in play, but that's at a very surface level. I think there's a very long-term agenda going on here, folks, and the agenda is to create Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. They want to see an Islamicist civilization, a united caliphate, and they want to see it for two reasons. Number one, it would be a powerful enough opposition, rather like the Soviet Union in the Cold War, to rally Western uh, support and so on. But number two, such a civilization will be exposed for the vast medieval backwardness that that particular version of Yahwism really is. And they want that so that eventually they can strike at all of those things and rid them. So, in other words, it's not just the Islamic world, these people that are being set up by the West, it's also Russia, all right? Because Russia has a culture that is deeply tied, as you know, to one of those Yahwisms, to Eastern Orthodoxy. Russian culture is impossible to conceive of without Eastern Orthodoxy. So, in other words, they're setting up a vast, in my opinion, long-term clash of civilizations. That's the real goal here. And that's the reason for the inexplicable policy decisions that you see going on right now in Washington, D.C. I don't suspect that we're going to see much debate in uh, the gas bags of Congress that is going to talk about these things. There has been some opposition on both sides of the aisle, incidentally, to this plan. But again, I don't think that we're going to see much debate, and I think to a certain extent there may be those that object to this. I think to a certain extent that President Obama is in a very difficult spot. That on the one hand, he's being pressured to do and has been pressured to do much more in terms of interventionism, and he has really been balking to do so in a certain sense. On the other hand, you have the military industrial complex, the intelligence complex going ahead with it anyway. So there's, I think, some real factional infighting within the power structure of the United States of America taking place as well as this larger geopolitical agenda. Anyway, that's it this week for news and views from the Nefarium. One final announcement, folks. We do have a members vid chat tomorrow night. Cross your fingers that everything is going to go smoothly. I had a few problems getting this news and views ready and prepared for you today, so hopefully we'll be able to go ahead with our members vid chat. I've already got a couple sets of some very good questions. And the second announcement that I have is to be patient. I heard from Adventures Unlimited, the printer is trying to rush Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. Let's hope that that doesn't mean they do a bad job and mix up page order and all of that sort of stuff. They are trying to get this out as soon as possible, and I will give you an announcement on the Facebook page just as soon as I know anything. And watch the Facebook page in case there happens to be a change on the members vid chat tomorrow night. But anyway, that's it for today's news and views from the Nefarium, folks. I'll see you on the flip side. Thank you, everybody, that one dear lady and all the rest of you for your donations and your subscriptions. Welcome to the new members, and God bless everybody.